Joe Biden made a comment at the debate Tuesday night that struck me as utterly shocking and appalling, but it wasn't a traditional gaffe of his, so it didn't involve him making comically outdated references to record players. It didn't involve him stumbling over his words to an extent that he just was rambling incoherently. So it kind of got missed by the media, who are mostly concerned with theatricality and who does best in a performative sense. But the substance of what Biden said here was just unbelievable. So let's play the clip.
Vice President Biden, we know you would not have withdrawn troops from northern Syria in this way, but that is already in process. So would you send American troops back into northern Syria to prevent an ISIS resurgence and protect our Kurdish allies?
I would not have withdrawn the troops, and I would not have drawn the additional 1,000 troops who are in Iraq, which are in retreat now, being fired on by Assad's people, and the President of the United States saying, if those ISIS folks escape from the prisons they're in, they'll only go to Europe and won't affect us. It has been the most shameful thing that any president has done in modern history, excuse me, in terms of foreign policy. And the fact of the matter is, I've never seen a time. And I've spent thousands of hours in the Situation Room. I've spent many hours on the ground in those very places in Syria and in Iraq. And guess what? Our commanders across the board, former and present, are ashamed of what's happening here. What I would do is I would be making it real clear to Assad that, in fact, he's going to have a problem because Turkey is the real problem here. And I would be having a real lockdown conversation with Erdogan and letting him know that he's going to pay a heavy price for what he has done. Now, pay that price.
Just to clarify, Mr. Vice President, would you want American troops back in northern Syria?
I would want those 1,000 troops to be protected by air cover, those 1,000 troops that are having to withdraw under fire, make it clear that they're not going anywhere, and have them protected, and work my way back toward what, in fact, needs to be done, protecting those Kurds. They lost their lives. This is shameful, shameful what this man has done.
Did you hear that? Biden's claim is that Trump withdrawing troops from northeastern Syria is the most shameful thing that any president has done in the realm of foreign policy in modern history. Now, I don't know when Biden pinpoints the beginning of modern history, but let's just stipulate that it's post-World War II, so 1945. That's generally what people were referring to when they say modern history in terms of U.S. foreign policy. I could name you about 50 exponentially more shameful things that U.S. presidents have done just over the span of 1 year. I could name you dozens and dozens of things that are more shameful that Biden himself presided over 8 years in the Obama administration. Think of what he's saying. The removal of troops is the most shameful thing. Not the deployment of troops in perpetuity, not the illegal occupation of foreign territory, which, by the way, Syria was. There was no legal mandate for U.S. troops to ever be there in the first place. It was not congressionally authorized. It was not at the behest of the Syrian government, unlike the presence of Russian troops in Syria, which was at the invitation and is of the Syrian government. Biden is saying that all the bombings of civilians, all the preemptive invasions, all the coups, all the assassinations, all the sanctions, everything less shameful than the withdrawal of troops from a war zone. Now, I think you can make reasonable criticisms procedurally of how Trump has approached this withdrawal. He hasn't handled it probably in the most intelligent fashion, and I don't know that I would say that he has betrayed the Kurds, because the Kurds are not entitled to indefinite U.S. military support till the end of time. And if they felt that the U.S. was a reliable partner in the first place, they were sadly mistaken. They could have just looked to their own history, which proved that not to be the case. where the U.S. had made assurances to them and things changed pretty swiftly. And, Trump's bluster and craziness, I get why people just react negatively to its presentation. But if you drill down, withdrawing troops being the most shameful thing that a U.S. president has done in the foreign policy domain in modern history is just mind-blowing in its absurdity. And I don't know whether Biden genuinely believes that, or if it's, once again, his cognitive impairment talking, probably some indeterminate combination of the two. But it didn't really get much attention because it wasn't one of his more laughable verbal miscues. It was actually something which, on a substantive level, reflects totally warped thinking on his part. I mean, let's go back to the Obama administration. Do you think the Libya intervention of 2011, when Joe Biden was vice president, was perhaps a bit more shameful, considering it was also illegal by a variety of standards? Obama exceeded the War Powers Act, and there were congressional resolutions on a bipartisan basis rebuking him. It was initially framed as a purely humanitarian intervention that didn't seek to engineer regime change, and then later on, of course, morphed into a regime change initiative where Gaddafi was toppled and then murdered in the streets. And Syria basically fell apart and disintegrated and became a land of slave markets and tribal warfare. And it fueled a migrant crisis, the ramifications of which are still ongoing. That seems a tad more shameful to me because you know why? It involved the affirmative deployment of U.S. military force for a purpose that ended up being nefarious. If you say that withdrawing troops is somehow more nefarious, then I have to question your fundamental moral bearings because you are totally lost. And so that's one of the scariest comments that Biden has made thus far over the course of his campaign. I've done videos and I've done articles recounting the time that I interviewed Biden in New Hampshire a month or so ago. And Biden claimed to me that he opposed the Iraq War from the beginning, which is false. I mean, go back and read about the history of the Vietnam War. Refresh your memory. I can recommend some books if you'd like. I can't tell you how many episodes just within the span of the Vietnam War that will shock you in terms of the cruelty and barbarity inflicted by the U.S. on innocent civilian populations for no discernible strategic purpose, creating generations of trauma and destitution, bombing people into oblivion, and just destroying that entire country. And people there are still cognizant of it. I would go and talk to somebody who was alive during the Vietnam War and ask them what they think the most shameful episode is. Do they agree that it was the withdrawal of troops from northeastern Syria? And I think they'd have a different view. You could probably ask some Iraqis, Libyans, Syrians, Panamanians, Nicaraguans, Chileans, etc. The same question. And they'd probably tell you that the U.S., trying to overthrow their government or bombing them and basically just wreaking havoc in their country was a little bit more shameful than the removal of troops. So Biden needs a history lesson, and considering he's 76 years old, that's probably not going to be forthcoming. So, wow, that was a brutal moment, and it just glided right by if you're just a casual news consumer because it's not something that the media cares to dwell on. All right, I will talk to you later.